You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Land. This podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts Tiffany Cruikshank and Katya Bach as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.
Hello, Kirsten, and welcome to the Yoga Medicine Podcast.
Hello, welcome to you to see me.
I'm so excited to talk to you today. We're going to jump into some big, juicy conversations, hopefully around motivation and goal setting and setting ourselves up for really big, exciting challenges in our lives. But I wanted to start firstly by asking you what drew you initially to sports performance and coaching?
I've always been a very active person, and growing up, my dad was a pretty world-class athlete. And so, I'd see him running. He'd run like 10 miles before work, and then he'd play tennis for 2 hours after work. And I really idolized him. And so he passed when I was 6 years old. And so I think really part of the reason I got drawn into sports so much was just this desire to feel closeness to him. And so I knew that he was an athlete because that's pretty much everything any relative ever told me about. Like every story started with, Jim was this amazing athlete in this way. And so I always felt connected to him whenever I was in sports. And it was in high school, my cross country coach, he joked after an injury that I had, not that he was joking about my injury, be sort of insensitive, but he always said that I had a strong eye for seeing the athlete, and I was a really good coach. I was captain of the team by my junior year. And he's like, I know for a fact you're going to be a coach someday. And I remember laughing and telling him, like, I'm going to get a real job, coach.
Little did you know.
To this day, by the way. So we laugh about that one. But I've always been really fascinated by how the body moves, how it can perform. And so that just kind of progressed over the years as I moved through my own body and wanting to help other people. And me also just kind of being like a natural leader. People were drawn to, oh, I have this problem. You seem like you've had a lot of injuries or know people with a lot of injuries. Like, how do I work through this? So that's really where it started. And then it's kind of woven itself all over the place, taken a few back roads along the way.
And was running always your major sport, your sort of biggest sporting love?
Yes. And, I joke because I'm 5'11". So a lot of people are like, oh, like people would see me, they're like, oh, basketball, volleyball. And then I would like joke back like, oh, mini golf. And they'd be like very confused. I'm like, I'm associating, like, you think I should do this because of my height. So I'm just going to assume that mini golf, because you must be small, right? Like that's the only thing you would play. But I was kind of a heavy kid, and I was bullied quite a bit about my weight. And even though I loved being really active and I was out in nature a lot, I also ate a lot of my feelings. I struggled with anxiety and depression still to this day, but most of my life. And so cross country was the only sport that did not have tryouts. Like if you showed up, you were on the team. So I'm like, ta-da, I'm an athlete. And I still remember the first meet. My best friend at the time was getting changed in the locker room, did not know I was coming down into the space. And she had said, if I lose to Kirsten today, that would be my biggest failure because she's so fat that I would kill myself. And I thought, oh, that's what my best friend's saying about me. Like, what are my enemies saying? Oh, and I remember thinking, like, I will do anything to beat as many people today as possible and prove to them that like the size that I am doesn't matter, that with like determination and focus that we can achieve anything. And it was an invitational. I took 8th place out of over 100 kids. And so people kind of like stood back and like, wait a minute, how did Kirsten do this? So
It was kind of a way to
natural. Yeah.
challenge people's.
Running was sort of I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it sounds like it was a way to challenge people's perceptions of you.
Absolutely. And so I continued with running, and I fell out of running partly because I so closely identified it with my father that at one point I also wondered if I was only running because of him, that it wasn't really like my sport. So did I get into it first, one, just so I could have this identity of athlete? And two, was I just afraid to fail at anything else? So I didn't even try for other sports. It was easy to get into it. There were no tryouts. And so I kind of stepped back from some of my sports and from running, only to come back to it. I did find that it was in fact mine, but sometimes the things that we love, we have to let them go to see if it's really meant to be. So running has always been my sport.
Well, you've just raised a lot of childhood anxiety for me, that's for sure. I was also a bigger kid, but I was terrible at sports. And your mention of the tryouts made my blood turn to ice. My escape was yoga. So I didn't run, didn't play any tryout sports, but yoga was something that didn't expect anything from me. And so I continued to gravitate towards that. How did yoga come into the picture for you?
Something that's funny that you say there, that yoga didn't expect anything of you. I often tell people that the reason people dislike yoga if I say, do you like yoga? And they say, no, it's not for me. It's the same reason they dislike running. We're alone with our biggest critics and our biggest cheerleaders. And running also doesn't expect anything of me. The path, the trail, the road, it never asks me any questions. It's just there for me. It's like the longest mat you've ever unrolled, depending how far you go. And so, running has been that same sort of practice for me. And even I can recall friends of mine early in my athletic career saying, you should try yoga, it would really improve your running. Like maybe you could work through some of your anxieties and bring them together. And I was like, yeah, I'll never do yoga. Again, that's 2 times I've eaten my own words. So now I'm a lot more cautious around that. So when I did actually have the ability, I will say, to receive the practice was when I was going through cancer treatments. So when I was going through cancer treatments and I could not run, I could not really do anything. I was in a room with a woman who was a yoga teacher, has a long lineage in yoga. And I recall her telling me that, yoga could help you with your anxiety. It can help you with these treatments, but more than anything, it could help you reconnect to the things you love the most. And I was like, okay, so a sun salutation is going to make me feel like I'm running. She was like, no, but it can free your mind in the same ways that running was for you. And you can create meditations or visualizations around nature and the aspects of running that brought you so much joy and brought you healing. Even though your legs can't go there, you can visualize your legs moving through the forest like you are. And that's going to help you in your recovery, and you're going to get stronger through that. And that was a real turning point for me, not just as a runner, but as a person, and how much I had not really taken the time to step back and see that there really are so many different modalities for us to intrinsically connect to ourselves and find that freedom that I was always using running as the space to do so.
What kind of yoga practices felt the most effective for you while you were going through cancer treatment?
Most of what I did was meditation. Restorative, gentle movements. I can still recall the first time doing a sun salutation in the hospital and falling to my knees, just crying, being able to get through it 3 times without collapsing from exhaustion. And that was such a powerful moment. And I still hold on to that to this day. When I have these moments of uncertainty, I remember how far I've come, and also a reminder that, that is always a possibility for any of us, right? Like the page can turn and something can happen. And I want to be reminded that I always have these tools that I can lean on. And movement in breath work, a lot of pranayama helped me. And it reminds me again, like breath in running is like my footsteps against the ground are a continuation of my breath, which is a continuation of my body. And I feel that same way on my mat. And over the years, all of the different movement practices that I've brought together, I'm able to find that synergy, like the synergy of it and that connection to the breath and the movement. Sometimes the movement's the mind, sometimes the movement's the breath, sometimes it's the body. And on those very blessed days that I have, all three come together like the Holy Trinity, okay? Because it's not perfect. That's why it's a practice.
Yeah. What took you to teaching? Was it wanting to share? I know you teach other cancer patients. Was that where it started, or did you start teaching elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that I've always been a teacher, especially after my father passed. I've been so fascinated by the human condition and people's experiences that I can recall praying that if I could just see my dad one more time, I would do anything God asked of me to help or teach others, to help them in ways that I could. And to this day, I swear that I saw my father in that moment. And so I've always felt really called to teach in any gift that I've been so fortunate to have. And so it was in the passing of my teacher, she lost her battle to cancer, that I think I felt an obligation initially to carry on what she had taught me, because that allowed her life to feel extended. And so it didn't feel like she was really gone. And I still have practices that she has taught me that I always lean upon. And I don't necessarily mention in classes that they were hers, because they are very personal and dear to me, but they're laced in everything that I teach. And so I smile, I feel uplifted knowing that she gets to carry on her teaching through me. And I want to be able to honor that. I mean, as with any teacher, I mean, yoga medicine, I've taken classes of yours or Tiffany's or, Valerie's, anyone. My hope is always that when I'm teaching, I'm carrying a piece of your teachings with me that somebody else can experience, and we can continue to grow that experience to the communities around us.
I think that's one of the things that I love about teaching as well, and that there's probably nothing completely unique coming out of my mouth. It's my interpretation of all of the things that I've taken in from other teachers over the years. So let's circle back to running then. You have set yourself a pretty huge, pretty juicy goal for 2022 to break a world record in June. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So I am going to attempt to break the world record for most consecutive 50Ks run. So that's days in a row. For those people who do not understand what kilometers are, I tell
it's
people
a long
like 50K,
way.
they're like, is that 5 miles? No, 50 is approximately 31.1 miles. Anything over a marathon distance is considered an ultra. So it would be an ultra distance that I would be completing. The current record for females is 11 days, for men is 21. So my goal is to get to 22 days, to take the whole shebang.
Wow.
And I'm doing it to raise money for the Trevor Project, which is a nonprofit here in the United States that helps LGBTQ youth with crisis intervention. Through the pandemic, I have watched more than anything, our LGBTQ youth really struggle with mental health. And sadly, just in reported statistics that the Trevor Project has gathered, every 45 seconds, a youth between the age of 13 and 25 will consider suicide. And that's, when I think about the amount of miles and the amount of hours I will spend in the run, I think about all the lives in that moment. And so my hope is that people will donate to the Trevor Project and become really aware of it. 2021 was the worst year for legislation for anti-trans bills here in the United States. They're up to 82 legislations to keep kids out of sports. And it breaks my heart because, as we've just discussed, like, sports were so much a part of of my life. And as someone who in high school attempted suicide, I also know how hard it was for me to hold on to this identity that so many people said was wrong and feel so uncomfortable and not know where to turn. And so Trevor Project offers resources where one counselor will reach more than 100 youth. And that's so important. I want all children, to be clear, but the LGBTQ youth to know that they're seen and they're loved and supported and that their lives matter. And I also want them to see a queer athlete and coach and teacher who is thriving and is capable and know that they can have that same life for themselves. I hope that in this long journey, in this small act, even though it feels a little like a large act, that others can draw the inspiration and the motivation to know that we can endure, because endurance has always been the metaphor people like to choose in terms of talking about life. And I think also an ultra, for anyone who's done it, it has its highs where you're like, I could do this forever, and lows and deep, dark places. And we emerge on the other side of it just truly transformed. I can't really describe outside of, I've been in yoga practices that are similar where you just like, you ride this wave of it. And so I'm excited, but I'm also a little terrified because there's a chance that it won't happen, like that I might not reach that. But I have grown from the young child that didn't try out for sports out of fear for failure. And I'm leaning into that potential because even if I fail, I assure you that I will go down in a blaze of glory, giving everything that I have.
And either way, you set such a powerful and potent example of the courage, the courage just to stand up and give something a try after saying publicly, whether that goes the way you'd like it to or not. That example is so powerful. Now, I have run a couple of marathons, which are shorter distance, 42.2 kilometers or 26.1 miles, I think it is in miles. And I can't imagine wanting to do more than that or wanting to do that the day after. So how did you choose this particular goal for you personally? And maybe we'll take that into a conversation about how we choose our own goals. What was it about this that inspired you?
In the end of August, I was feeling a little burnt out and a little uninspired in my own teaching and coaching. And so I took some time away from coaching and teaching, and I just wanted to spend time in my body. I wanted to spend time in my thoughts. And so I started what my wife has called my walkabouts, my spiritual journeys. And one day I was just like, I'm going to leave the house and I'm going to have a pack with food, money, phone, chart, everything I need. I'm just going to keep going until I'm like, I'm ready to come home. And I might use my phone a friend option to call my wife to come pick me up. And when I was out on the run, I was close to 50K and I was like, wow, this felt really good. And so then I went for a hike the next day that was like 10 miles and significant elevation. And I'm like, this feels good. This feels right. And I did another 50K then the next weekend and the next weekend. And I was like, I wonder what the world record for 50Ks consecutively are.
Sneaking over to the computer. I wonder how many I'd need to do.
I wonder what that is. And also at the same time, while I was out there, I was having some conversations that I had with my athletes and with, I train everyone from youth up to adults, and some of the youth in the LGBTQ community who have been struggling, and they were weighing very heavily on my heart. And I was like, what can I do? Because so many feel unseen, that aren't sure, they don't feel safe at home, or they're not in school right now, they're only at home. So like, where is that space of acceptance? And with social media, they feel bullied 24 hours, 365 days a year. And how do I let them know that people care? And I think that for every dollar and every mile that I am taking, I think that speaks volumes to people that I know right here. You know, like you donating $1, someone's like, wait, somebody took the time, even if it's $1, right? And said, I can give to that. I can let you know that I'm one person and that I support this. So that's kind of where it started to go. And then I have an amazing friend, Valerie Hunt, who runs a program called RunRx. She and I have worked together several times over the years, but I was like, if I write my own program, I will pick days where I'll be like, no, I'm not doing that. Yeah. So we have merged together. She's written quite a bit of the training to help me in this process, but she's also very honest with me. So when I called her uncertain if this was a crazy idea, she was like, I'll be honest, I thought it was going to be something crazier.
Could have been worse.
Like, oh no, I didn't even dream big enough.
I think that's big enough. I think that's a pretty audacious goal. So what about for the rest of us, given that you are a coach and you coach people with a range of different goals, what tips would you give for those of us who are trying to figure out what's a goal that would excite and inspire us? What's something that would motivate us to feel like we're going somewhere in our lives that isn't running 50Ks every day?
Be clear, you do not have to run a single mile.
Phew.
Or kilometer. You know, I think it always comes back to, we have to do a little internal work and ask ourselves where we are in our lives, because it's also really important to know that who you were 10 years ago is not the person you are today. You're not the person you were 10 minutes ago. So I hear a lot when athletes come to me like, I want to be able to run like I used to, or I want to look the way I used to, or I want to, like, but you're not that person anymore. And you should give a little credit to the fact that this person sitting here right now, not only was that person, but then they were the next person and the next person and the next person that led you all the way here. And when they pause there for a moment and say, oh, yeah, I did get here. Now the question is, how did you get here and where do you want to go? And that takes some honest inventory in terms of, you know, you and I have discussed what identities we bring to our lives. We all have various identities that we aspire to. And I'm going to speak specifically to yoga teachers here for a moment. If you've been through your yoga teacher training, a 200-hour, I assure you, one, you are drawn to that training for a reason. Probably might not have just been the curriculum. Oftentimes the curriculum is secondary. Usually there's a teacher there, right, that really inspired them to want to get trained that way. And what I see happen is everyone tries to mimic that teacher or that group of teachers from the 200-hour because they see that they're successful, that they're happy, and that they're having an impact because they felt that impact. And so they make it their goal to be the next Rachel. And that's lovely, but the only thing I can ever do then is be a second-rate copycat of Rachel. And I wasn't put on this earth to be a second-rate Rachel, right? I was put here to be the best version of Kirsten. And so if I peel back some of the identities of what my goal was, if it's attached to you, that I'm trying to do this because I see all the things you're doing, is that really my goal? Or is that the identity that I've created based off of your goals that you have created before my eyes? So
I'm so glad you brought this up, because I feel like I see this all the time. People setting goals and then wondering why they're not continually motivated to achieve them. And when it really boils down to it, they're doing something that their parents thought they should do, or that they think society expects of them, as opposed to really knowing what makes them tick and gets them out of bed in the morning.
Well, and I've told my athletes before, they're like, I don't understand why I feel so unmotivated. And my question to them is, are you being true to yourself? And I have to, I have athletes who are like, I want to get in race shape and I want to be ready for this triathlon. But they're afraid to say what they really want is, I really want a 6-pack. I've told my athletes, I would rather you be really honest and say, I know I don't need a 6-pack, but I want a 6-pack and I want to be killer at the triathlon. When you can be that honest with yourself, then we can start to truly motivate. If you hold that piece back though, there's always a part of you that's going to create guilt or shame around then secretly wanting to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone who spent a good majority of their life in a closet, that's no fun.
Mm-hmm.
Because you never feel like you're afraid that you're going to slip up one day and you're going to say like, I want a six pack. And you're afraid someone's going to be like, that's so shallow. That's so superficial. That's your goal. If that's your goal, I'm on board. Like, I want you to be honest about what you want. But I'm also really honest with my athletes. Like, you don't need a six pack to be an elite athlete.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's not a requirement to do so. So if the motivation is lacking, it's usually because we're not being authentic to ourselves. And I see the same thing on the mat. If you and I both have the same job, we've both been commiserating, we're both stressed out, and then all of a sudden I'm like, man, what's Rachel been doing? Like, skin's glowing, she seems happy, she's just living it. And you're like, well, I have been doing yoga. And I'm like, tell me more, right?
I want what she's having.
Exactly. I'll take all of it. And I show up to the practice right next to you, and I'm sitting here the whole time like, well, what is she doing that I'm not doing? Because I'm not feeling this bliss that she keeps coming to work with. I wrapped it in your identity and what you've achieved because you're doing the internal work, and I'm trying to just focus on the superficial, what I can see. And then that leads to, I'm not doing yoga anymore. It doesn't work. It didn't work because I didn't get there for the right reason.
And how do you suggest people do that internal work? I know you've been journaling for much of your life. Is that something that's helped you clarify what you really want, how you really feel about things?
Yes. Journaling, get up in the morning, set a timer for 2 minutes, just free write. Clear out all of the stagnant thoughts from the night before, and create space to then ask yourself the honest question of, what do I want? And I'll write that down. What do I want? What do I want? What do I want? And then I might go for, I walk my dog. So I walk my dog and I'm asking myself, what do I want? And these thoughts start to come up. In August, I kept asking myself, what is my path? What is my path? And the sound that kept, the thought that kept coming up is, this is the path. I'm like, well, yeah, I know I'm walking on a path. I got that part. Like, what is the path? It's like, this is the path. I'm like, what is the path? This is the path. And then it clicked for me, like, being present is the path.
Yeah.
Like, you have to be here. That's how you get there. Be here. So journaling is a great way. If you have a meditation practice, setting a timer and just letting the thought, I always come back to an ocean tide. It moves in, it moves out, it moves freely, and let those thoughts move in and out. And then when the timer ends for your meditation, that's where I'll journal. So if getting out of bed and turning and writing doesn't work, you could do a meditation or a breath practice. But there is something powerful. And I know there's been a lot of research in terms of the connection of the pen to the hand and the hand writing it, even more so than just verbalizing it. So putting it down, something that feels a little more permanent, helps us get honest with where we're at.
And it sounds like there's some patience involved too. Like, you ask the question, what do I want? And it's probably not going to be the first answer that you get, but you need to keep asking and wait, and keep asking and wait, and see what layers kind of bubble to the surface.
Absolutely. I mean, with everything in life worth having, right? Patience is a part of it. And we're not great as human beings with patience, especially as we evolve more and we have so much right at our fingertips. It's like, if I don't know the answer, I'll Google it, right? Like, if I don't have this, like, I can check it on social media. I can call my friend who should be like, I'll be honest, there are days I really miss the landline and the answering machine. Like, when you left for the day, if you were on vacation, you were on vacation, okay? You came back, you got to, first of all, you came up with a really great answering machine message. You got really creative there. And then you got to come back and hear all of the boring calls that were just like wasted. And then your friends. And you're like, yes, this is great. Now it's like every 5 seconds, someone's like, where are you? You're like, I was driving. That's why I didn't text you. That's why I didn't call you.
All of the immediacy. And in fact, that kind of leads me on to what I wanted to ask you next, which is, once we've found a goal, once we've got something in mind that really excites and inspires us, chances are the glow will fade because, as you said, most things that are really worth having in life take time. So how do you do the little things, the daily things that you need to do to get you all the way through to that big goal? I know on your social media, there are a lot of posts around patience and repetition and doing the little things. Is that what keeps you going when the immediate excitement wears off and it's a cold, rainy morning and you don't really want to go for a run and you've got your training program? And yeah, what would you say to that loss of motivation over time?
I always come back. Actually, it was in Mark Holzman's class, and he said, set an intention. And then he's like, now let it go, and the only thing you have to do is keep showing up. You don't have to keep saying the intention. You need to keep showing up. That's the hardest part. Keep showing up. I have this saying with my athletes: 1 is greater than 0, right? Simple math.
Yeah.
I feel
Even
like
I can figure that out.
Doesn't matter what the math system is, where in the world 1 is greater than 0, that should stay the same. So if I get up and I have a 10-mile run on my schedule, or I have a 60-minute yoga practice, and I'm like, you know what I can do? 1 minute or 1 mile. Chances are, if I do the 1 minute or the 1 mile, I won't stop at 1 minute or 1 mile. My cross country coach told us in high school, I remember him saying, your first mile is a liar. So if it's good or it's bad or it's indifferent, it doesn't matter. The first mile is going to challenge you. So don't get so caught up in it and get so cocky thinking it's great, because then it might not be. But don't be so defeated if it's not, because it can get better. And if you're somewhere in the middle, you're probably best, because now your adrenaline isn't spiking and your performance isn't plummeting. Same thing. 1 is greater than 0. So if you're struggling for the motivation, one thing. If the goal was professional and you wanted to send so many emails, open 1 email. Just open 1, and you will start down that path. Showing up is powerful.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. It's a really simple and achievable thing to do, no matter what your motivation levels are like in the moment. And you're right, those little things add up. Even if you do stop at 1 mile or 1 minute or 1 email, it's still 1 more than you were going to do. And eventually that gets you closer and closer to where you want to be. We are really fascinated by variety in today's society as well, novelty. And I talk about this a lot in the context of yoga practice, feeding our bodies novel and varied stimulus. But there's also real power in repetition. And I know that's something that you've spoken about on social media as well. What would you like people to understand about the power of doing the same things over and over again?
So there was a study done, a sports performance and psychology, to look at what differentiates a non-athlete, a recreational athlete, and an elite athlete. And so they were given a task of looking at a computer screen, and when prompted, when the arrow pointing up flashed on the screen, they pressed the button with the up arrow. The non-athlete could do it for 1 minute before their brain started thinking about other things. Right? 1 minute. Good for them, right? The recreational athlete was able to go 10 minutes before their brain started thinking about other things. And these are averages. The elite athlete minimally could do 90 minutes of just pressing the up arrow.
Wow.
Extreme focus is one of the biggest differentiators between moving the needle and staying exactly where we are. And so while we look for novelty, there is power in the repetition to move the needle forward and to see real change. Novelty can feel great because we think that we need all this various stimulus. But if I just gave my athletes different workouts every single day, how do you really know that you've improved? And in what measure? What am I measuring it by? If I do the same practice, and I've done this, I've had a 40-day practice where I recorded it, I taught it in class, and for 40 days, they did the exact same practice. Now, can you bring the same level of joy curiosity, excitement, and attention day 1 as you could day 40. Some people dropped off like day 3. Some could get to day 40. But that ability to cultivate that is such a skill that when you hone in that repetition, the novelty becomes amplified. You need less in the novelty for it to feel so different. Jay Shetty talked about when he was a monk and he had this tiny little path, and every day he had to find 50 different things that he saw on the path and share that. He's like, do you have any idea how hard that is for monks who've been there 20 years walking this same tiny path to keep finding 50 new things? Or you have a dog, your dog could walk the same path every day and always wags their tail, right? And has this excitement. I'm like, if you're not sure how to bring curiosity and excitement to repetition, become an animal, become a dog. They're super excited. Every day is different.
And I read in your book, Struggle Guru, you speak quite a bit about struggle, unsurprisingly. And one thing that really struck me was the power of the repeated struggle, because you said each time it gives you a chance to see it with a fresh or a new or a different perspective. And I imagine in anything that we do in life that requires some time, anything that we want to be motivated for a long period, there are going to be struggles and setbacks. And this is maybe your superpower, your real area of expertise. What advice would you give people who hit speed bumps in the path that they've planned for themselves and they find themselves struggling?
I think the first point is in my lessons and what I share in the book is, if we can stop seeing struggle as a bad thing, and what if struggle is our partner, our ally, to give us the lessons and the tools that we need to grow? When I started to see my struggles instead of these things that are holding me back, what if it's like drawing an arrow back? Right? Like I draw the bow back for the arrow and it's going to catapult me forward. So struggle is pulling me back, is setting me up for that propulsion. If I can just start to flip that switch and see it just a little differently, struggle can become that superpower instead of feeling like the anchor that is keeping me in the harbor when I know that I was supposed to sail, right? So I think that's part of it, is just like people like novelty and they like to change things, flip the script on how we are seeing it. I know that's not an easy shift. It's not as easy as turning a light on and off. I wish that it was. But if we're repeating a specific struggle, there's a reason. There is a lesson. And if we try to ignore it and we stuff it in a box, it might go away for a little while, but eventually that box is going to overflow and it's going to spill out and you're going to have to deal with it. So, hindsight's 2020. How many times have I stuffed things back and oh, I don't need that. And then it explodes. And I feel like my whole world crashes around me. Sometimes you got to wipe the slate clean. So if you're at a point, someone who's listening is like, no, I feel like my struggle has come so far that I am just at rock bottom. Well, great news. You get to build a new foundation. You get to choose that foundation.
So you're sort of seeing the struggle as like resistance training for your motivation and your goals.
Absolutely. Rachel, you got to get swole in the body and the mind.
Hashtag swole.
I can't even say that with a straight face.
But it is true. It's one of those things that is annoyingly true, but horrible to say. You had a setback in an earlier period of training where you were training for a distance run and you were injured and you started rowing instead and wound up rowing 50 kilometers. I mean, is that your way? If you can't go through, you'll sort of go around and find a different option.
That goes right back to where Valerie was like, see, you're crazy enough to sit on a rower for 50K. I'm sure you will be fine. She's like, you couldn't pay me to sit on a rower that long. Yes. I think that has been a culmination of my life experiences. It hurt deeply. It still hurts to think of the loss of my father. But I also think of how at such a young age, seeing loss changed my perspective for life, changed my perspective of how we experience things, what we hold on to, what we connect to. I think that's sometimes why I feel so deeply. And that sometimes can lead to my anxiety, is because I open myself up to so much of this to let that really come in. And I believe that in anything, if I can't find a way in that initial set, that there's always a resource. And that, I mean, I do have a background in journalism, and day one of my journalism course 101, the teacher was like, you don't have to have all the answers, but you need to become the most resourceful person in the room. And so it's like, it's funny because, coaching doesn't exactly merge, you don't think, journalism, but that piece has bled over into coaching and teaching. I'm not going to be everyone's teacher, and I'm not going to have the answers for every person, but I can start to connect to communities of other teachers and other perspectives that could help somebody else. And so resourcefulness has always kind of been like trained in me. And I think that that's good for anyone. If it's not working this way, if you're a person who's like, yoga has always worked for me, it's always been my path, it's okay to try something else. I always use the example, we all used to eat baby food and now we eat solid food. We can progress.
Things can change.
Although I do still take baby food on my runs because it's very portable.
Oh, interesting. I've never heard that. Bananas, yes. Cooked potatoes, yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Baby
little
food.
squeezy pouches. You find the baby aisle. Yep, that's me.
Wow.
You'll find little pouches.
Well,
I joke with people, like, I'm going to be an endurance athlete sponsored by Gerber.
I can't wait to see the new labels come out on those jars. In the book, you also differentiate between struggle and failure. Can you talk a little about that? I found that fascinating as a distinction.
I think we create a lot of words and say that they're synonymous with one another. And so people see struggle as failure, and failure feels really permanent, but we need to fail. Failure means that we have pushed our edge. And that's where we start. Again, that's like the move the needle. We push up against, I've been in plenty of yoga practices where it's like, find that balance between edge and ease. Yes, but some days I need to push that edge. I don't need to jump over the cliff, to be clear. I don't need to like leap, okay? But I need to teeter over that edge, which is not hard because I'm 5'11" and most yoga mats are not long enough for my body. So I teeter over the edge naturally. But that push into that failure, that's how you grow. If you're a strength training person, you train sets to fail. Failure, you push, you try to buckle underneath, not all the time, but when you push to that, that's the stepping stone to go to the next piece. Struggle, I like to think struggle is kind of the lead up to that. Like, failure might be on the horizon and you might need it. So sometimes struggle won't appear until the failure's already happened. People think struggle is gonna like wave the flag and say, stop here. Sometimes it shows up afterwards. It's like, I needed you to do that so that you would start listening to me. Okay. For all the parents listening, the amount of times they've had to let their child fail because the child was not receptive to the lesson, and all of a sudden they come back, they're like, why didn't you tell me? Like, I did. Yeah, I did. But you weren't ready to hear it.
I find this sometimes with therapeutic yoga as well, that some of us, some of the time, we need to really hit rock bottom and get to the end of the rope before we're willing to reassess our assumptions and restructure our lives. So,
and I will say one of the things that more recently I've talked about is dig the well deeper. So that's like my mantra for right now. If we all started with a 3-foot well down, and I pull up from it to draw from experiences to strengthen myself through any struggle or obstacle that's in my way, at some point, everyone's well will dry out, right? It's all the same. So we have an option. I can come to other teachers and other resources. That's the external. So I seek those external pieces. And that will put water back in my well, but that will only work temporarily. I could also seek the teachers and the resources and then grab a shovel, dig it deeper. Because then I can all those resources are going to create an even larger amount of water. And my life resources, that water, is going to be a larger reservoir for me to draw from. So if it feels like you're struggling, another thing you do is like, well, I guess it's time to get a shovel. If you hit rock bottom, get a shovel. You could always go deeper.
You might need some heavy machinery, but you'll get there one way or another.
It's fine.
So in terms of suggestions or tips for people who are sustaining motivation over the long term, we've talked about finding a goal that is really personally meaningful to you, that isn't something that's from parents or society or what you think you should want to do. We've talked about being willing to do the things every day, the little things, repetition. And on the days where motivation is lacking, just to do the one thing or the 1% or the 1 minute or the 1 mile. We've talked about the inevitability of struggle and how we can reframe struggle to be our friend and our training partner. And then you've talked about digging the well as well as bringing in resources from the outside. Some of the other things that I've seen you mention are to grow your circle carefully, to kind of build those external supports around you, and to prioritize yourself first. So you've talked about starting the day with meditation and movement before anything else crowds in. Are there anything you want to add to those tips, or any others that you want to add to the list to help sustain people's motivation? That was a long question.
I think if you have the capacity to being outside, even if it's stepping out on your balcony, is powerful. As beautiful of a space as we can create and curate, no matter how beautiful the home, the retreat center, there are still walls. And those walls can still press in against us and can feel really limiting. And just stepping outside can be really symbolic of stepping outside yourself for a moment to become the observer and take a deep breath. And if you have the ability to look at nature and look at greenery, there's a lot, again, about being in nature and its powerful effects. Look at things like forest bathing or Shinrin-yoku and how that can affect our immune system and our anxiety and our nervous system. So just stepping outside for a moment can be really powerful, and letting yourself be vulnerable. I think that's sometimes the hardest thing, is giving yourself permission to be vulnerable. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to fail. It's okay to feel struggle. It's okay to feel unmotivated. And I want to be clear, so many times we are convinced that motivation is this cheerleader, this big rah, but sometimes motivation is just the quiet whisper saying, you need to rest. And I think there's a confusion between lack of motivation and not listening to what our body really needs. So that's another question. If you say, I don't want to get on my yoga mat, do you not want to get on your yoga mat because you're not motivated about yoga? Or were you up late last night trying to finish a business project? Were you trying to bathe 2 children and get ready for a holiday and pack all these things? Is it actually that you didn't get enough sleep, that you didn't refuel enough, that your body just isn't recovered? So the motivation, then, that thought of, I can't get on the mat, the motivation is actually trying to take you into a space of rest. So instead of the vinyasa, take the restorative, sit in meditation, sip the cup of tea or coffee a little slower. Those things are really impactful. And it was the British cycling team that started researching all of those little things to impact their Olympic cycling team. And they went from being no one to one of the largest gold medal receiving teams in all cycling, because they studied the pillow that you slept on and the mattress, all the little things. So they call it the aggregation of marginal gains. Little things in your life can impact your motivation, and check in with what that motivation really is. I think that helps us all.
I'm really glad that you talked about rest and recovery. I was following the Iron Cowboy, James Lawrence, as he did 101 Ironman length triathlons in 101 days, which also sounds really unpalatable to me. But he spoke about how the recovery portion was as important, if not more important, than the active portion. So I'm really glad that you suggested that people pay attention to those signals and prioritize rest and recovery and just even frivolous time that doesn't get you closer to your goal still gives your brain a break from focusing on it and kind of holding that front and center, doesn't it?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. If I'm holding so tightly to that goal, I'm suffocating it. And that strangles out the motivation. So what you're saying, like that frivolous show that you watch or that act that you have, could actually be the most impactful thing that you do to keep you sustained in that goal. That's ultimately it, right? Like, how do I sustain motivation? How do I create sustainability? Well, it comes back to being really honest with myself. Am I really tired? And if I keep being tired, then I need to address that schedule. Is there anything I can shift? Because I hear a lot, I don't have any time. Well, all right, Rachel, but I saw that you were on Facebook for 3 hours today.
Not true. Not true. Absolutely not true.
This is an exaggeration. This could be a dramatization. But again, that 1% or that 1 minute, could I shift it that way to give back to myself? That's so hard for people to do because they're convinced that it is that frivolous act, and that's not helping my goal. And there are coaches out there and teachers out there who will tell you that you're not disciplined enough, you're not focused enough. Well, maybe I'm not right now, and there's a reason for that. Maybe something is going on internally that I often caution teachers of being so presumptive of in terms of understanding what their student is going through.
Yeah.
You don't know what your students are bringing on the mat. I don't know everything my athletes are bringing onto the playing field. I need to create space where they feel held, they feel seen, and vulnerable enough to share that so they can be honest about really needing rest. Because the last thing I want is an athlete or a student not to feel comfortable to take a child's pose or to take a day or take a week off to just reset and do whatever makes them happy that has nothing to do with their training or their quote unquote goal. It lets it be free. It releases that strangling of that goal. We are like, drishti is great and focus is great, but we confuse focus as narrow-mindedness or narrow vision. And I talked about that in the book, tunnel vision. You get tunnel vision, we put blinders on horses so they go ahead, but there are other things happening outside of those blinders. And we need to be able to feel comfortable enough in ourselves that we can allow for that.
A diligent practice plus non-attachment, doing the things every day, but giving them space to breathe, 100%. And that sort of circles us back to the importance of us actually really knowing ourselves and investing time in understanding what drives us, who we are, how we feel. So I wanted to wrap up, if we could, by talking a little bit more about identity. You have a course on Yoga Medicine's online training platform. I want to get them in the right order: Sex, Gender, and Identity in Yoga, which I have done and I thoroughly recommend for people, especially if, like me, you're in a privileged enough position that you've never really had to think about your sex, your gender, or your identity. You just wake up and you're good to go. It's a really interesting way of checking those assumptions and giving you a bit of space to investigate and perhaps recalibrate them. Why is this such a passionate topic for you?
This course is the first time that I felt like I could really use my voice and be myself. I said that I stepped away from running. I stepped away from a lot of things because it was so hard just to live in my own body, let alone to show up for other people and hold space. I was tired of being told, whether it was as a coach or as a yoga teacher, stop posting that you're lifting weights. Maybe I'd let you teach meditation if you looked a little softer, sound a little softer. Maybe you change this or you change that. And it's funny because much like the look you just gave me, like, what?
Yeah.
It happens, and it is happening every single day. I've been threatened more times than I care to count, just for being present as myself authentically. And I think about that when my students show up on the mat and they unroll it and I watch their body language, and I think to myself, man, there's so many different identities walking through this door. And my language might impact whether they feel seen. This sequence might feel so ableist that it keeps somebody from ever considering a yoga practice. And it's not to say that so that everybody's checking a list and freaking out as a teacher, as a coach, but it's about this awareness of how many identities cling to us. Before you even really knew your name or could spell it, at least, people already said things about you, right? They're like, oh, maybe they said like, oh, Rachel's so cute, she's going to be a heartbreaker to the boys. It's like, they've already made assumptions. You're shaking your head.
That never happened, but other things for sure.
Right. But like, or maybe they're like, Rachel's a tomboy and Rachel loves, like working in the garden, and how's that going to be perceived? Or act like a lady, or that's not very masculine. Like, don't be a sissy. Like, these words have weight. And the problem is that I have walked into a room feeling like somebody has bound me and gagged me, put me on the mat, and then expected me to become expansive in a pose. And I'm like, have you ever, like, just take a jump rope, wrap it around yourself, and try and do like tree pose and open your arms? Like, maybe you hold your legs, but you get open to warrior two. You're like, tiny little arms reaching out. I can't, right? Like, we can't see that every day. And so to be able to do a course that asks us to step back and to look at our identities and to look at how our identities influence the way we teach, the way we talk, the way we connect with our world, I think is really important, because I don't think we do enough to help encourage youth up to adults to ask those questions, to say, who am I? And is this me, or is this a projection of what everybody else has said I should be? And it's really hard to stand authentically as yourself. People like to throw hashtags around and like hashtag authentic self. And I'm like, it's often with some like protein powder or supplement or gym membership. And I'm like, okay. But the truth is, authenticity is gritty. It's vulnerability. It's raw, and it is challenging. And I still struggle. I still struggle with being able to show up fully in studios, in classes, at sporting events, because I have to look over my shoulder and wonder if somebody sees a rainbow on my shirt or on my tights, if they'll attack me or if they'll throw things at me. And so how do I hold space in there? And how do I help others to see that there are people just like me who are showing up in your classroom, looking for a space, not just to heal, because I think there's a great deal of focus around trauma and how do we heal people in these spaces. But I want a studio that not only creates a space to heal, but to thrive. I want to be able to stand proudly on my mat, and not just in June because it's Pride Month and somebody slapped a pride flag onto it. Like, I want to stand there and I want to feel confident, and I want to stand on my mat and feel confident. As part of the reason my personal practice is so personal, because there's still so much of myself, even in my body, that I still don't feel comfortable with. And I noticed even as I was filming the course, Like, if I wear this outfit, will somebody think something? Can I wear this outfit? And will they assume that because they already created an identity around my gender or my sex, that if I dress this way on the yoga mat, that now they don't know who I am, and now they don't trust me because they feel like I've broken a trust with them because they thought they knew who I was. Like, these are the complexities, like the little pieces that come up that I hope people will dig into for themselves, not for me, not for the benefit of me, but for yourself, to say, where are my blind spots? Where are my biases? And how can I learn more about myself so that I can help others do the same? That's the invitation in this course.
You've said that the words or the concept, I see you, is even more powerful than I love you. And so you're suggesting that if we're able to see ourselves more honestly and in all vulnerability, then we create space to see other people in the same way.
Absolutely. I mean, when someone says, I see you, I hear, it doesn't matter what identities you've attached to it. Like, I see you, I love you, I accept you, I embrace you. And like you said, if I can say that to myself, I see you, what love I can just encase myself with. And that is so hard, because we're so much in social media looking for external validation that your existence is real. I mean, there are people legitimately right now arguing whether my existence as a non-binary person is real. I have to sit between the rock and the hard place while rock and hard place get to live their lives. And I have to wonder if that is going to be enough, right? Like, what will that bring to it? So, I know I say it with a little heaviness in my heart, but there's hope. And I'm hopeful because of spaces like yoga medicine. Tiffany and I have had these conversations. Tiffany was one of the first teachers I felt seen. She didn't look at me as any particular gender, sex, or identity. She saw me as a person, and I could feel that. And I think that's something that we could all develop and cultivate as a teacher, and what power that has. Because I know is no small act on her part, even though she didn't even know she was doing it, that it gave me the ability to stand here and to use my voice in this way to help others do the same. And that's that ripple effect. And so take the course, learn about yourself, send me questions. Like, I love it. I still have people who send me a DM or email me and ask questions about the course and things they're learning. I love that. And please, I also don't want people to be afraid to ask questions or to say the wrong thing, quote unquote. Say anything, just say something. I'm happy to say something. I'm just happy that you're considering it, having these conversations, digging into the hard work.
And you'll also be offering a range of classes on yoga medicine online and a monthly dose unpacking motivation and goal setting. So lots of opportunities for people to get to know you a little better, and through that to probably get to know themselves a little better too. Where else would you direct people who want to learn more about you and what you do?
I think the easiest is probably my website. So it's just kbwaters.com. So that's the easiest way. That has all my social media handles, because most people spell my name wrong. So I've shortened it to make it pretty easy. kbwaters.com. They can go there. That'll connect them to me, whether they're looking for coaching, whether that's athletic or personal coaching, learn more about my book, or connect online.
Thank you so much for your time, Kirsten. I've really enjoyed it. It's been an emotional roller coaster just listening to your story. So for anyone who is curious or interested, I second your words. Do the course, read the book, follow you on social media, because if it doesn't get you thinking about what you're doing with your life, then something's wrong.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you liked the show, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com. Check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine, or you can email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being part of our Yoga Medicine community.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.